Well, hello everyone. My name is Justin Luttrell. I'm focusing on the history of American Christians and Islam. My key text here is American Christians and Islam by Thomas Kidd. The subtitle is Evangelical Culture and Muslims from the Colonial Period to the Age of Terrorism. And so this is my key text throughout my research paper. And I chose to focus on this because I personally I'm a teacher. I teach in high school. I teach high school social studies, but I did spend 5 years teaching English as a second language, and I had a number of Muslim students. And furthermore, I have friendships and connections with many Muslim people. And I was curious, and just a question came to my mind: what has been the history of Christian-Muslim relations? And this text in particular focuses on American Christians in Islam. And I start off my research paper focusing on President George W. Bush in September 17th, 2001, just days after 9/11, going to the Islamic Center in Washington, D.C. and claiming that Islam is a religion of peace. And this set off a firestorm of reactions from different individuals, in particular the Republican Party, but moreover, in the American church. So within evangelical Christianity, predominantly the response was frustration, anger, a lack of understanding of why President Bush would say something like this. There had been a wide-held belief for quite some time that Islam was in opposition to Christianity. And even leading up to that, maybe give or take 4 or 5 decades before that, in particular in the 80s and 90s, you see a concerted effort. You see a publishing house, if you will, a lot of money being made off of the selling of prophecy books. And a lot of this, we can have speculation for this. Was it Y2K? Was it something else? Was it the fall of the Soviet Union that brought about this type of literature? And so we see a lot of people writing quote-unquote prophetically, and Christian evangelical pastors. Some of the bigger names were like John Hagee and Hal Lindsey, and those that were explaining that Islam played a key role in the end of days. They would even put Russia or the Soviet Union in that mix. There had been a wide-held belief throughout history, even before World War I, that the Ottoman Empire had to be destroyed because the Ottoman Empire was essentially holding the Jewish people hostage. They were holding the Holy Land hostage. They were not allowing proselytization of Jews. They were not allowing Jews to return to their homeland. It was becoming a big barrier in Christian missions. So there's a whole chapter in this book dedicated to Christian missions as well. But back to President Bush's comments, I use that in the introduction of my paper because it's a flashpoint in our contemporary time of sort of this conversation that has lasted since that time. It's been coming up on 21 years since September the 11th, and Islam has been highlighted more ardently, I believe, than ever before since that time in the West. You could challenge that, you could debate that if you'd like, but in terms of like a mass media, or we talk about having social media and that kind of thing, and the debate over what's the nature and essence of Islam, you've seen a lot of Christian apologists begin to speak more and more about Islam. You've even seen the rise of Muslim apologists in response to that. So the focus of my paper in many ways is what is the history of Christian-Muslim relations, and furthermore, from the Christian perspective, just from what Christians contend, and even from looking at the Gospels, what would Jesus do, right? So what would a Christian claim that, I'm curious what Christians would do, would believe Jesus would do in regards to the other, to the stranger, to someone who has a different viewpoint, and even in light of 9/11. And to take that a step further, what do the Gospels say about those that have differing views than Christians? That latter part is not the main focus. The main focus would be the history of the relationship between particularly American Christians and Muslims, but at the same time, that is perhaps a final final sort of curiosity, if you will, that I will explore. So, without going into great detail, I mean, this is a pretty good book. It's a concise history of American Christians and Islam. And of course, in the paper, I include other resources and look a tiny bit at the theological similarities and differences between the two religions. But I think some themes that are very interesting to me are, especially in early colonial America, you see this in a stretch, basically from the 16th to the 19th century, that if someone in the Christian church and in different sects of Christianity were to disagree with someone else, they would call them a Mohammedan, or they would use that term pejoratively to try to align their theological foe with what we can presume, based on what we see here in this text, was just a generally widely accepted cultural idea that Islam was something nefarious, was something wrought about, in some sort of demonic manner or something like that. That's the impression I get from what Thomas Kidd is indicating here, based on his research and study of early colonial American history in this way. And we see that there is this maligning of your theological foe as a Muslim. It's like, oh, well, you disagree with me, you're a Calvinist, I'm Arminian, you must be Muslim. And Islam was paired together with Catholicism. So it's almost like in the view of someone who is calling someone a Muslim or a Mohammedan, that they are as quote unquote as bad as a Catholic, so to speak. And who wants to be that? It's kind of the idea, like who would want to be that or whatever, amongst Protestants. So these are mostly Protestant sects and subsects that are disagreeing with one another and slandering one another by using Islam, making comparisons to Islam. I thought that was quite interesting. Then you have the Barbary pirates, and this is where pirates in North Africa are capturing European Christians, selling them into slavery, and there are accounts written about this. We presume a lot of embellishment there. And the takeaway from these accounts that are widely read is that Barbary pirates are Muslim, therefore Muslims are some sort of evil or terrible kind of ominous force to fear. And there's always a mix. I think we see this with 9/11. We see this, a mix between, is it the individual? Is it some sort of political movement? Is it more geopolitical than it is religious? There's a lot of arguments to be made that it is more geopolitical than religious, and you even see this with Barbary pirates in North Africa during this time, where the case might be that it is more, the focus is more on the idea that these are individuals who are selling people into slavery, stealing from others that happen to be Muslim, rather than the Islam, their faith, being the sheer motivation to cause them to do these sort of negative and terrible things. That's a longer conversation to be had about whether or not a religion is spurring someone on to do X, Y, Z that causes such evil and such negativity, bring something like that into the world, or is it just more something along the lines of a political or social movement? So moving forward from that, he gets into World War I, the fall of the Ottoman Empire. He does talk a lot about missions, so I thought that was interesting. So you see a concerted effort, I think particularly in the 19th century, but very much after World War I, of the rise of mission organizations. The Ottoman Empire falls, you see European empires or countries go and divide up the Middle East, and we see for the first time a lot of missions organizations becoming very excited about the opportunity for missions to occur, because the Ottoman Empire that was so feared by the West for so long is now no more, and there's going to be this opportunity to evangelize. And so a theme we see throughout the book, however, in accordance to this idea, is that Islam is almost an impenetrable faith when it comes to conversion, when it comes to evangelizing. It's almost this idea that, amongst these missions organizations, that Muslims appreciate the time and effort spent. Thanks for telling me about Jesus and all of that, but I'm pretty good the way I am. And we see a lot of these missionaries get quite discouraged, and they kind of take a consolation prize, so to speak, or a second, option D in evangelizing and seeing conversions amongst Eastern Orthodox Christians in that area of the world. So then they, a lot of these missionaries get settled in and kind of satisfied with just building relationships with and being being focused on these Orthodox Christians, and kind of saying, that's just going to be the way it is. Islam's essentially too much of a challenge to try to convert these people, to try to evangelize. Culturally so different than us, so we'll go with the Orthodox Christians in that way. Moving past that, I do appreciate how a kid kind of takes a look at a couple different approaches. You do see, I would argue, many individuals just lambast Muslims and essentially call them demonic evil, try a certain fear inducing campaign against them, say that this is a faith that just sees non-believers as infidels and that kind of thing. But what you see after World War II in particular is the rise of organizations like Campus Crusade for Christ and InterVarsity and some of these, and their objective is more listening and being relational and things of that nature. And so you see the kind of like post-war, later, the latter end of the 20th century evangelical movement taking place. I would argue that I wonder to an extent if there is a combination of a lot of these missions movements being led by people who are in universities who have a little bit more of a critical understanding of religion and have a bit more of a desire to listen and understand and take that approach, because it had not been taken pretty much for the 300 years prior to that. That there was just kind of in my summation of it, kind of we told you about Jesus and the gospel, you didn't accept that, I guess it is what it is. And so what we see with some of these post-war ministries and college ministries and other types of missional movements is a bit more of a approach towards listening and understanding, and this carries on even leading up to 9/11 and in some cases after 9/11. I really appreciate what Kidd says here at the end, and I think this is a nice way to kind of summarize and sum up everything that I've been researching here. So he gives kind of his opinion here in the epilogue. And so, Kidd is, he does mention, I should say, I'll go back to the preface. He does mention that he himself is a Christian. And he essentially wants to be honest about and take a real and sobering look at what the relationship has been like between Christians and Muslims. And at the same time, claim that he cannot deny that he is himself a Christian, a follower of Jesus. But he says, and there's a theme here too, I should say, about how a lot of people who are very verbally critical of Muslims and condemning of Muslims and stirring up fear and anger, often in a misinformed way, are actually hindering missional efforts amongst Christians who really want to do right by these individuals in terms of listening to them, understanding them, showing them the love of Christ. So he says here at the end, I do not believe the Christian impulse towards evangelism of non-Christians, including Muslims, will or should go away. Instead, I would only suggest that Christians take Muslims seriously, minimize or eliminate unnecessary offensive language, highlight cultural commonalities, and refuse to indulge in sensational stories about the ostensibly evil and demonic character of Islam. They should refuse to baptize any political party or nation as exclusively Christian, or to use any party or nation to advance spiritual goals. Ironically, if Christians focused on both maintaining civic peace and testifying to the truth of their religion, they would probably achieve better results in evangelism. Bluster, bombast, and excited forecasts of exonerable destruction do not make for good witnessing, but courtesy and understanding do. The history of the American Christian thought about Islam, sadly, has demonstrated precious little courtesy and understanding. So, in giving his own opinion, and at the end of the day, Kidd is encouraging a push amongst Christians towards courtesy and understanding, after having highlighted how that in many ways did not happen. And I think that that is a great way to end his text there, and focusing on, looking at this as a case study, if you will, on how to best bring about mutual respect and understanding in an effort to have goodwill towards your fellow human be honored and idealized. I think this book and my paper is basically a case study of examples and non-examples, ways to do it and ways to not do it, particularly from Christians towards Muslims. So that's a summary of what I'm researching, and I appreciate your time.